How's it going, friends? So there's something that I've been seeing pop up in conversation quite a bit, and I swear it's felt like at least once a week, once every few months, there's a mention of an inevitable update, major update I should say, for Mario Kart World. And I use the word major because nothing that we've gotten so far is what I would classify as a major update. What I'm talking about is along the lines of new tracks and new characters, basically what most people would refer to as DLC. There have been a few updates that you would expect with any major title released in the past 5 or 6 years, and most of those updates have either amounted to something that really should have been included at launch, either because it's a no-brainer inclusion, like being able to track the switches that people were grabbing all over the world map, or adding custom items to the races, something that was in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe but for some reason they didn't launch the new game with. But as far as actual added content goes, we haven't seen new tracks and new characters applied to the game yet. And while I kinda dabbled on this discussion in mid-2025, I thought it would be worth bringing up again. Because people swore that when the game was announced to be $80, it meant that Nintendo was going to be regularly adding new content to this title, so much so that I remember content creators and even just regular commenters online and forums talking about how clearly there would be tracks and characters added with every new game release, and especially tracks added with theming related to the holidays anytime that's relevant. But naturally, nothing of that has even been remotely spotted. In fact, the closest that we got to an update was like 5 months ago when people expected that there was going to be something related to Donkey Kong Bonanza added to the game. And of course, people took that information and ran with it and got their hopes up, only to be let down once again in the typical Nintendo hype fashion. Although in this case, it might not even be Nintendo's fault. I blame the people that get excited for no reason, setting false expectations for a company that's frequently just letting you down. And perhaps even more so, the content creators that just clap like seals and look for anything to talk about to generate some artificial buzz because Nintendo is just not putting anything out worthy for them to make videos about to appeal to their audiences. But the fact of the matter is the game has been out for half a year now, and we've still yet to see that added content that so many people were adamant we should expect prior to the end of the year. It was meant to be the justification for the $80 price tag after all. And in a similar fashion, that's what justified the price for Sonic Racing Cross Worlds for many buyers. $70 for the base game guaranteed that you were going to be getting some new tracks and some updates with the season pass, and if you paid $90 you got the additional stuff as well, with a whole plan laid out as to when that stuff would be coming in. Most recently was Pac-Man. But the thing is, whether you like this business model or not, the transparency from Sonic Team, as well as any other game that offers clear update paths of DLC that will be coming in the future. Mario Kart World, like most decisions that Nintendo makes, removed all sense of transparency, and it let the people run wild with their imagination, applying logic that would work with everything else in the game industry, but not always with Nintendo. Right, the logic here, or at the very least the justification for many, initially was that Nintendo charging $80 was going to be worth it because they were going to be offering content for years to come. Specifically, content in the form of DLC. And we obviously haven't seen that at all. And my argument from the very beginning is that I don't expect that we will be seeing any major DLC. Well, at the very least, my argument was that we wouldn't be seeing it in 2025 at least, because people swore we'd be getting it every week and every month throughout the year. And the reason I felt that way is because Mario Kart 8 Deluxe launched in its full completed version, and because it was the best-selling game on Nintendo's best-selling console, that being the Switch 1, Nintendo never felt compelled to add anything to the game. And why would they? That's an inefficient waste of time, money, and resources for something that is already a resounding success and will continue to be a success. This is just the logical way for them to approach the game. Outside of just regular updates to make the game playable, the content that is meant to put in a significant amount of work, it's kind of pointless to them if the game is doing well. And I think it's a bit naive for people to expect major things added to this game. And I think it branches from an assumption from certain fans who expect that Nintendo is going to be doing things to please them, rather than operate like a business. If you recall, when they announced the price was $80, the view from the many people that were basically indifferent about the price tag was somewhere along the lines of, obviously Nintendo is going to charge $80 for this because they're a business at the end of the day, and if it's going to sell well regardless, why would they not take that extra profit? This logic was a general theme around the Switch 2, and it still is for the most part. Frequently being reminded that we should not view Nintendo as nothing more than a business, and that we're wrong for going against it and trying to stand up against things because they're not going to do things to do us a favor. So there's no point in a backlash, a boycott, etc. The problem is they mistook what we were doing as thinking that Nintendo needed to be nice to us because we wanted them to be nice. No, our backlash is so that we can force them to be nice to us in order to earn our money. So if anything, we're the ones that view Nintendo like a business business and we're behaving as such. People that expect Nintendo to go above and beyond after you've already given them the money for the game, you're the ones that are not viewing them as a business. This is a game that is very successful and it's going to be continuing to do amazing numbers. For Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, there were only 2 reasons that we got the booster pass after so many years of the game being out. The first one was because the tracks were already made, since they made them specifically for Mario Kart Tour so they can make a killing off of that mobile game, and they ported them over to the Switch in the easiest fashion with very minimal adjustments just to make sure it's playable on the console. And the second reason was to push the expansion pass. Nintendo adding all of that content was justified from a business perspective. That's why they did it. The only way Mario Kart World gets additional DLC is if after the bundles stop, people legitimately stop buying the game. But as we've seen with the sales for Mario Party Jamboree, for example, Mario will sell. Right, like the first Mario Party game for the Nintendo Switch 2 is an $80 title. And that so far has not stopped the people that are willing to dish out $500 for a Switch 2 from buying the additional $80 game. Because those that are willing to spend $500 on the console, a majority of them are going to be willing to spend $80 on Mario. This is partially why, while I understand why many of you updated your Switch 2 just to play your Switch 1 games, and I don't necessarily fault you for doing so or attack you for doing so, but this is why the whole partial boycott / backlash thing doesn't work. Anybody that's purchased the Nintendo Switch 2 console, even if they're still, up in arms against Nintendo, even if they don't go out of their way to spend $80 on these games, indirectly they are helping the sales of those $80 titles, as well as the poor quality in their major titles, as well as all the anti-consumer stuff that they're doing. Because basically in the latter half of 2025, there were all these sales going through because the Nintendo Switch 2 had done so well, and the normies out there that were willing to purchase the console ended up spending $80 for Mario Kart World, or Legend of Zelda, or Mario Party. And the fact that we know that people out there were willing to spend $80 on these Switch 1 ports that they're calling Switch 2 edition games, that means there will probably be enough Mario Kart World buyers after the bundles ended where Nintendo won't feel the need to add anything spectacular to it. I'm not necessarily saying they won't do it, I'm just saying that if you use past experiences with Nintendo, they're unlikely to do so. And as a matter of fact, to add on to that, I actually do believe there could potentially be some DLC coming from Mario Kart World, but I don't expect it to be free. Why would it be free? Like, I think best case scenario, you might get faster speeds, or you might get some intermission tracks that were not already put into the game, just ripped something out of the hub world, for example. Some super simple stuff that does not take too much effort on their end. And as far as new characters go, you're just going to be looking at more costumes that you already see in the character roster as it is. I mean, this is kind of how they tried to sell Mario Kart World as being larger than any other game before, right? Everybody just got like 100 different versions of the same character, and the tracks are just simple straight lines taken off of the world map. So that could potentially be the easiest way for Nintendo to add things to the game if they feel compelled to. But even at that point, I don't see them offering that for free. At minimum, that's going to require an expansion pass. And for all we know, by that point in time, that could be the expansion pass that justifies the increase in price for Nintendo Switch Online. Because if things continue as they are, that's coming for sure at some point. But if Nintendo was to go out of their way and legitimately make some good new tracks for this title, or maybe even port over some tracks from Mario Kart 8 into this game, and especially if they start bringing in major characters from the Nintendo sphere, I just can't see them offering that for free, and potentially not even offering it with the booster pass. At that point, you're probably looking at $30. Because if they charge $20 for what they gave you in Bonanza, that's $30 for a Mario Kart DLC. That, for me, is a reasonable expectation when it comes to Nintendo and Mario Kart World and potential DLCs. The $80 is the base game price, and I think that was obvious for most of us in the very beginning, and that's why many of us abstained from buying the console. Even if it was offered at a $50 discount with the bundle, when that bundle moves on, everybody's going to remember as Mario Kart World being an amazing selling game for $80, even if the first 50%, 25%, 10% of the buyers for that game bought it at a discounted price. It sets the wrong message. And honestly, in general, the idea of that message that's being sent is a big reason as to why I'm so radical about this, for lack of a better term. So this won't apply to everybody, obviously, because I think some of you guys are more level-headed than others. Even if you bought the Switch 2, you paid $80 for Mario Kart. Like, at the end of the day, not everybody's got to be a martyr, and even the people that are giving tons of money to Nintendo, if they're watching my channel for this long, I think they tend to understand why it's problematic, but they probably just don't really feel like their purchase makes that big of a difference, and 100% I totally get that. I'd probably be in the same position as you. The difference is, since I actually have a voice and there are people that are listening to it, I feel more obligated to do something about it. But outside of the buyers that still want Nintendo to actually fail and genuinely feel strongly against the stuff that Nintendo's doing, you have buyers and fanboys out there that are willingly pretending to criticize Nintendo when it's necessary to be critical. In many ways, I consider these individuals worse than the blind fanboys. So put it this way, what are we calling them now? I know it started off saying bootlickers and shills and glazers. I've always felt like that was a bit too mean. I like to stick with like Switch 2 corporate apologists, because I don't want to call them Nintendo fanboys because I think I'm a better Nintendo fanboy than they are. And that sentence alone is probably the most fanboyish thing I've ever said. But those individuals, those corporate Nintendo apologists, something I can actually respect about them is their willingness to stand up for what they believe in. I don't agree with what they believe in at all, but I can respect the fact that they're always out there holding their Hylian shield and Master Sword, and they're just ready to go to war for the cause, which is exceptionally harder, especially right now, because everybody online hates the Switch too. There's a very small circle of the internet that actually likes it. But these militant Nintendo fans, for a lack of a better term, oh, they don't compromise. They're like, of course Mario Kart World is worth $80. Because Mario Kart makes me happier than anything that Sony puts out. I don't know why you're complaining about Nintendo bricking consoles. You never should have thought about playing their game with a higher frame rate. Or the fact that every single one of these Joy-Cons that keep, for some reason, getting beheaded. Are you guys seeing this online? Like, I feel like every day somebody's posting a picture of like the top of their Joy-Con breaking for like the slightest drop off of a desk. But like Nintendo products used to not break if you were to drop them that easily. They're just made so cheaply now, and it seems like it's a weak point in the Switch too, but nobody's talking about it yet. But anyway, that happens, and right away these people come out and they start insulting your way of life and assuming that you're grabbing your Switch 2 and slamming it across the room. That group of individuals, they fight for the cause no matter how wrong they are. And I'm not gonna lie, I can kind of respect that. The ones I don't respect are the ones with a lack of a backbone. They're the ones that are going out there crying about the price of Mario Galaxy 2 as they spend $70. Like, it's not fair. Why would Nintendo do this? But I have to have a physical copy of Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 so I can complete my collection. They're the ones out there saying like, they're mad that people online are complaining about Nintendo. And they're like, well, I understand why they would complain about $80 Mario Kart, but they're kind of taking it too far. Have we or have we not taken it far enough since this many people have decided to buy the Switch 2? They're the same ones that are like, oh, Nintendo should probably do something nicer in 2026. But at the same time, like, I mean, they released more exclusives than anybody else. So maybe we shouldn't be too hard on them for breaking people's consoles or canceling our game sharing that allowed us to play games with one copy across 2 Nintendo Switches. Like the whole mindset of like, we should be critical of Nintendo, but only under an explicit set of rules. And look, dude, I don't know if it's because I grew up a minority in the West or because I was disadvantaged because my family was pretty poor, but I was always taught that if you wanted something done right and you wanted to be treated fairly, you had to have a backbone and you had to be in control of the situation. Now, I realize I'm talking about gaming, so for some people that might feel like it's a little deeper than it needs to be, but how much am I actually exaggerating about this? Most people listening to this have probably spent more money on gaming than any other non-necessity in their life. Gaming is a part of our life, it's a part of our culture, it's a part of our economy. And the economy currently sucks. And we, across the board, not just Nintendo, I say that line just to, not ruffle a few jimmies, we gaming fans are frequently seeing the corporations do better and better while we're getting screwed. We've gotten to the point where there's zero expectancy for them to do anything for us. And that never used to be the case. And I don't know exactly when that changed. Because, like in general, millennials, I think we were a little bit more willing to spend than, say, boomers, for example. We didn't really care as much about full ownership. We're okay with putting ourselves in debt, partially because the economy kind of required us to do so if we wanted to live a half-decent life. But I don't recall even like 2017, 2018, up until maybe the pandemic, I don't recall such a lack of a belief that things could change if you just simply not support a company. And maybe that's because in the last 5 to 10 years, we've kind of given up on the masses. We just assume there are too many people that are going to pay and going to support it, so what's the point in even trying? I don't know, this is going to sound kind of weird because it's getting a little bit political, but it's not me trying to push somebody's political ideology on the other. But I know in the past, 2 election cycles, at least in the States, both the liberals and the conservatives have faced a losing election recently in the past 4 or 5 years. Further back, if you want to say 2016, 2020, and then 2024. And on all 3 of those elections that were lost, up until the day of, the losing side was convinced they were going to win. And on all 3 of those occasions, the losers were lost. And here in the States, specifically election season, it's like it takes over your entire life, largely because Trump has been involved in the last 3 elections, and he's got his personality. But it's almost like a reality TV show. To an extent, it becomes entertainment. Late night shows and different news websites get like all of the biggest hits, and it's weirdly entertaining, for a lack of a better term, even though there's obviously so much on the line. But the point is that it gets very exhausting, whether you're on social networking or TV or YouTube or whatever it is. And being convinced that you're right and you're going to win and then ultimately losing, I think is deflating for a lot of people, especially considering how much of this trickles down to just like your regular Instagram and TikTok user. So this is going to sound like kind of a reach, but I'm wondering if people have just kind of lost faith in belief that something can change that they firmly believe in. Because again, in the past 2 election cycles, both sides have faced a loss and both sides lost while convinced they were going to win. And I wonder how much of this trickles down to how people feel about corporations in general, or their fellow human being. They've just more or less accepted that there's no chance to stand up to anything because it's not going to change anything. But I think I've always had an issue with that type of belief, and it seems a lot more prevalent these days than it used to be. Because part of the reason you're supposed to have a backbone when it comes to these things, and I realize I got very real here when I was just talking about Mario Kart DLC about 5 minutes ago, but part of the reason you're supposed to have a backbone when dealing with this kind of stuff against corporations, peacefully against the government, I had to add the word peacefully there because I'm not trying to end up on any list right now, is because innately you should be encouraging what is good and going against what is evil. Like the line that I used way back months ago, before I think the console even launched, was that I would love nothing more than to be able to just buy Nintendo's new console and enjoy their games. But I would feel disgusted with myself knowing that I was willingly letting myself get ripped off by them. In the past, I was okay with spending more money on some of the software titles because in my mind, the logic was always that Nintendo made the entry point very cheap to offset the price of the games, and to an extent that made it worth it. And even though Nintendo was always greedy, they kind of were always lagging behind the competition with some of the more predatory ways that they've made money off of their customers. Not quite anymore, but in the past. And a lot of those predatory practices are what put me off from the competition 15 years ago. But with the Switch too, after all the prices started coming out after that initial direct, I just didn't feel like I was watching Nintendo announce their prices. $10 for Welcome Tour, $20 for the wheelchair basketball game, marketing 4K and 60 frames per second but not offering either 4K or 50 frames per second for their games, requiring people to pay additional money just so they can get that frame rate on some of their Switch 1 titles, and for most of the Switch 1 titles, not even offering a better performance. It started to feel very predatory and it started to feel very un-Nintendo-like. And that's honestly what set me off. I'm like, I cannot spend money knowing how much I was getting ripped off. That's just, it's innate in my brain. I can't go out of my way to actively support something knowing that it is wrong because I would lose respect for myself. And there were plenty of my viewers that, after the first video I made where I said I wouldn't get the Switch 2, were very much in support of me. But by the time I made the second or the third one, they were like, no, we can't do this. Like, we're still gonna buy the Switch 2, man. Like, you can't just sit there and go against it. And I'm like, hang on a second, you were 100% agreeing with me. I thought we were kind of like had an understanding here that this is wrong. Why are we still giving them money? And it made me lose respect for some people that were on my channel for a very long time, going back and forth in the comments all the time. And I remember seeing the same thing happen on the Nintendo Switch subreddits. There was a lot of dialogue back and forth about how messed up Nintendo was for certain things, mostly price related, obviously. But the moderators quickly silenced everybody that had a backbone and was like adamant that they needed to do something about this. They're like, no, you can be mad, but not that mad. That's too far. I think that's a big reason why so many people ended up on my channel. Many of you were like me. You were a lurker on Reddit. And then you realize that now there's like zero nuance on those subreddits anymore. And this applies to all of the Nintendo subreddits. Even the ones that are allegedly anti-Nintendo. They've all been compromised because they let pro-Nintendo people be in the moderating team, just FYI. The masses were against the Switch 2, but the mods quickly silenced anybody that was too against the Switch 2, deleting posts and getting them removed. And I saw the same thing happening on Resetera, on Installbase, on Family Boards, all of those places. In the very beginning, even GBA Temp, I think. In the very beginning, people were more critical and willing to have a conversation. Until those that were the staunchest Nintendo fans, obviously those are the moderators of these forums, because who else would be a moderator than the biggest corporate apologist, they began banning people because they felt that they were steering the conversations in the wrong way. But that's the reality. At the end of the day, you either stand up for what you believe in or you fall. I have an immense amount of respect for people that stand up for what they believe in. even if it's for something as simple as gaming. Because last I checked, gaming is still a part of corporate America. And if we were truly people that, rise up against injustices like so many out there claim they are, then they wouldn't need an asterisk at the end of the sentence. Because when it comes to these specific Nintendo fans, it seems like they have zero tolerance for corporations, unless that corporation happens to be Nintendo.